This video is a quick introduction to the conventions around punctuating titles so that you know how exactly whether you're supposed to use quotation marks, or underlining, italics, etc. So when we think about titles, there are a lot of different kinds of titles you're going to be working with. So you might have books, which is the impetus for this particular video at this point. You'll also want to cite chapters in books, articles in journals and magazines, and that will come later in the semester, newspaper articles, essays, poems, songs, plays, television series, there might be an entire series you're citing or a particular episode in that, film, short stories, commercials, web pages, and blogs. And these are some of the many different types of works that you would want to cite. And so you need to know, what do I do with them? So the question you might ask is, do I use quotation marks? Do I use underlining, or do I use italics? The basic principle is this. If it's a short text that you are creating or a part of a whole, you're going to use quotation marks. If the thing that you are citing is a longer text, like a book, you would use italics. And the exception to that would be if it's not possible to use italics, then you can underline. Like in a handwritten document, you might not have a separate font for your hand that creates italics. So in that case, you would just underline to show that this would be italicized if your hand actually did italics. So some examples of this more specifically. Use quotation marks for these types of very short works. Poems. If you're citing something that is a poem, use quotation marks for the title of that poem. Use quotation marks for the titles of short stories, quotation marks for songs, or articles from newspapers, magazines, web pages, or a chapter in a book. If you're reading Lord of the Flies and you want to refer to a specific chapter, use quotation marks around the title of that chapter. Some examples here for you. A poem, you might use quotation marks around Dulce et decorum est by Wilfred Owen. That was the war poem some of you read. Or a song. One of our students introduced this song, Hero of War, into a discussion. Again, it's a shorter work, so you're going to use quotation marks. And a chapter in a book. If you're reading Lord of the Flies and your chapters actually have titles, Gift of the Darkness for Chapter 8 for Lord of the Flies would be in quotation marks. For longer works, for example, books, you're going to use italics. You would also use italics if you have a collection of shorter works, like an anthology or a CD that contains multiple songs. Novels and books, plays, a television series that is a collection of individual episodes, titles of newspapers or magazines, an anthology that might contain lots of poems or short stories, CDs, encyclopedias or collections of works. Some examples on these. Your book, and this is the most immediately relevant point, your book should be in italics. The title of a newspaper or magazine, again, this is a collection of a lot of different articles, the Washington Post or Smithsonian. A television series like Game of Thrones. So let's take a moment and look at which words we capitalize within that. And know that there are different conventions around this, but there are some general principles. Generally, you capitalize the first word of the title and the last word of the title. And the principal words, those would be the important words. If you look at it from a grammatical perspective, that would be your nouns and pronouns, your adjectives and adverbs, your helping verbs and your verbs, basically the words that have content to them, and the subordinated conjunctions, fancy word for words like even though, although, after, before, during, those types of words. And you do not typically capitalize words that are prepositions, words like in, of, under, with, or very short words, words that are fewer than, say, 3 letters. So the advanced level on this, if you want to get into all the nitty-gritty, you can go to this website, Grammar Girl. She does a lot of different kind of podcasts. And what she says is the most important thing is to be consistent. And this is the website that you can check out. But again, get the most important content words the first and the last, and you don't necessarily have to capitalize the smaller words and prepositions. So some practice here for you. Take a moment, pause the video, and ask yourself if you would know how to punctuate these titles. And these are the answers. For a book, The Kite Runner, you would definitely put that in italics. For a chapter from your book, like Chapter 1, Miracles in the Notebook, you would use quotations around the title of the chapter and italics for the longer book. For a play, The Importance of Being Earnest, you would use italics. And for a poem, such as Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, you would use a quotation marks around that. That's a shorter work. How about some of the punctuation of the titles vis-a-vis capitalization? How would you capitalize and punctuate these titles? Once again, pause the video, take a moment and see if you know how to do that. And let's look at the answers for those. To Kill a Mockingbird is a book. It is going to be italicized. To Kill a Mockingbird. To is a shorter word, but it's the first word, so you're going to capitalize that. This shorter word here is typically not capitalized, but the other important principal words are. The Fire, Chapter 2 in Hiroshima by John Hersey. This is a chapter title, and so it's going to be in quotation marks. The as the first word gets capitalized. Hiroshima is a book, longer work, and so it's italicized. Frankenstein, a book by Mary Shelley. Capital word, single word, Frankenstein. The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. The is the first word. In is a smaller word in the context of it. Our is a smaller word, but it's an important word because it conveys the idea that this is multiple people, two important people interacting. So these words are all going to be capitalized, and the whole thing is going to be in italics. Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. Also a book, so it's going to be in italics. Narrative is the first word, Douglass is the last. The smaller words in the middle do not need to be capitalized, but the important words are life, narrative, the person. That's the content. If you need more resources, these are a couple of great places to check out and see there's some variations of this and some smaller details for particular kinds of works. But hopefully this has given you an overview on the basics of capitalizing and punctuating titles.